I still remember the smell of burnt coffee from the break room that morning. Mondays always had a weight to them, but this one felt different. Thick. The kind of heavy air you get right before a thunderstorm rolls through. I was halfway through my usual checklist, supply reports, shipping projections, back-end logistics, when my assistant walked in with an odd look on her face. "Mr. Grant, Trent wants to see you." Now, she didn't meet my eyes. Just left the room as quickly as she entered. That alone told me something wasn't right. Trent never summoned anyone from operations unless he wanted to bark orders or steal credit. But calling me to the top floor? That was new. And with Frederick out recovering from surgery, something told me this wasn't going to be a courtesy chat. I straightened my tie, took a slow breath, and walked the long hallway to the executive wing. The doors to the boardroom were wide open. Trent was already sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place. His back was straight, jaw clenched, fingers tapping the wood in some slow, practiced rhythm, like a man trying to imitate power without knowing what it truly felt like. He wore one of those smug grins that always made me think of frat boys on power trips. And of course, Evelyn was there too, sitting off to the side like some queen mother watching her son seize the throne. "Ah, Silas," Trent said, voice thick with false charm. "Come in. Take a seat." I didn't. I stayed standing. He leaned back and laced his fingers. "Let's not waste time. Effective immediately. You're fired." Just like that. No explanation. No warning. Just a slap of finality wrapped in fake professionalism. I blinked once, slowly. "You're firing me?" He smirked like he'd been rehearsing this moment in his bathroom mirror for months. "Mom said you were only here because Dad pitted you. That this was always a charity case." I didn't respond at first. I just studied his face, the little twitch near his eye, the way his throat pulsed like he wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. I'd seen that look before. The look of a man bluffing with cards he didn't even know the value of. Then I said it. Calm. Steady. "You'll regret this." His smile faltered just a touch. But it came back just as quickly, now fueled by rage. "Regret." He spat. "You think you can threaten me?" Then, whack. His palm cracked across my cheek before I could even process it. Silence. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just let the sting burn into my skin and memory. 2 security guards stepped in on cue, as if waiting behind the door the entire time. Trent gestured lazily toward me. "Escort him out." Now. The guards hesitated, probably confused why they were dragging out the operations director in the middle of a Monday morning. But orders were orders, and they took me by the arms like I was a trespasser, not a man who'd spent the last 5 years keeping the company's supply chain from collapsing. As they walked me through the main floor, dozens of eyes followed. Staring, judging. Some looked away out of guilt. Others looked curious, maybe even relieved. Not a single voice spoke up. And then I saw her, Marielle, standing by the marketing wing, holding a tablet and wearing that red coat she loved so much. She saw me. She saw everything. My face. The guards. The humiliation. Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't part. She just stood there and watched. Like a stranger. She didn't move. That told me more than words ever could. I didn't fight the security guards. I didn't argue. I walked with them. Past the glass offices. The open lounges. The elevator banks. I watched my reflection in every mirrored surface as we moved through the building I'd quietly helped keep alive. Not for power. Not for show. But because I believed in earning respect the slow way, the honest way. By the time we reached the main entrance, I felt the weight of every second I'd spent pretending I didn't mind being overlooked. I stepped out into the wind and adjusted my collar. The glass doors slid shut behind me. I could almost hear them sigh as they locked. That slap still burned on my face. But it was nothing compared to the fire building in my chest. I pulled out my phone. It buzzed in my palm. Text from logistics, finance, 2 vendor reps asking why I hadn't responded to their emails. I typed a brief reply to all of them. "Out for the day? We'll update you soon." Then I walked. Slowly. Deliberately. Not to the parking lot. Not to the train station. But 3 blocks east. Into a quiet building that looked like an old insurance firm from the outside. No sign. No receptionist. Just a keycard reader. I tapped mine against the scanner. The door opened. Inside was a single office. Modern. Clean. Private. Mine. They didn't know about this place. Not Marielle. Not Trent. Not even Evelyn. Frederick did, of course. He helped me set it up. Years ago, when he first whispered the words I'd never forget. "Someday, you'll need a space where you're not pretending to be small." I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. Sat down, breathed, let the silence wrap around me like armor. They thought I was just an operations guy, just the quiet son-in-law who got lucky marrying the founder's daughter. They didn't know about the shares, about the legacy clause, about the structure Frederick and I built to protect the company from them. Let them enjoy their little victory. Let them laugh, gossip, and pat each other on the back for finally getting rid of me. Let them think it's over. Because it wasn't. It was just beginning. They say betrayal doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks in with soft shoes and a quiet smile. That's what kept echoing in my mind as I sat in my private office, staring out at the city. From this side of the glass, the world seemed calm, orderly. But inside me, something colder had settled in. It wasn't just the slap or the firing that lingered. It was the silence, the kind that pierces deeper than shouting ever could. No one said a word. No one asked questions. And Marielle, she just watched me go like it was inevitable. Like I had finally fulfilled the role they'd written for me the day I joined their family. But let me backtrack for a moment, because none of this happened overnight. When I first met Marielle, I wasn't a man looking to marry into wealth. I had my own small logistics firm, profitable, quiet, nothing flashy. I liked structure. I liked systems. I liked being the man people didn't notice until they needed him. Marielle came into my life like a flash of light. Charismatic, confident, magnetic in that way only people born into privilege could be. She didn't fall in love with me because I had power. She fell for me because I didn't seem to want any. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. Her father, Frederick, was different from the rest of them. He didn't care about social clubs or status or who vacationed where. He valued competence. He saw how my firm operated, and he liked what he saw. When he invited me to consult on streamlining Grafton Enterprises' warehousing and transport model, I thought it would be a temporary project. Then came the second invitation. Then a full-time offer. Then, over drinks one night, Frederick said something that stayed with me. They underestimate you, Silas. That's not a weakness. It's your strongest weapon. And so I joined. Quietly. No demands. No title negotiations. I let them place me wherever they wanted, operations director, tucked away in the back end of the company. It was perfect. I had eyes on everything and a voice in nothing. I got to see who worked and who postured, who built and who bragged. And oh, there was plenty of the latter. Trent, for example. He was the type who mistook presence for power. Always loud. Always networking. He wore suits that cost more than some employees made in a month, yet couldn't read a balance sheet without help. But Evelyn loved to call him the future of Grafton. Said he had vision. What he really had was ego, and a mother who spoon-fed it to him like honey. Evelyn never trusted me. Not from the beginning. She'd smile at family dinners, pour me wine, laugh at my jokes, but there was something in her eyes. Like she was always calculating whether I belonged. I remember once, at a Grafton charity gala, I overheard her say to one of her friends, "Silas is humble. Too humble. That can't be real." She was right, in a way. I wasn't pretending to be humble. I simply didn't need validation. There's a big difference. But people like Evelyn and Trent, they couldn't grasp that. To them, if you weren't bragging, you were hiding. If you weren't loud, you must be weak. That misunderstanding was their first mistake. The second was thinking silence meant surrender. What they didn't know, what they never cared to look into, was who I truly was. Not just Marielle's husband. Not just the quiet ops guy. But a man with stakes. With reach. And, thanks to Frederick, with power they couldn't even imagine. The day Trent fired me, I could have spoken up. I could have mentioned the shares, the legal agreements, the silent contracts Frederick and I had structured with attorneys and board proxies. But I didn't. Because the truth is, sometimes you have to let people show the world exactly who they are before you take the floor. Let them write their story. Then tear out the final page. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. My inbox was full, confused suppliers, delayed schedules, even a few overseas partners asking why they hadn't heard from me. I replied to each one calmly, setting brief meetings. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't need to. They'd see it soon enough. Then I opened an older email. One I'd saved for a moment like this. Subject line, Legacy Clause Confirmation. It was a signed scan from Frederick's personal lawyer, dated 3 years ago, confirming my 40% voting share in Grafton Enterprises. Locked. Transfer protected. Silent until triggered by removal without cause or any hostile executive takeover attempt. Trent had unknowingly pulled that trigger. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how quickly perception shapes reality. All these years, I let them view me as background noise. And I never corrected them. Why would I? It's easy to maneuver in the shadows when everyone else is blinded by their own spotlight. They whispered that I only had a job because Frederick pitted me. They assumed I needed the family, that I needed Marielle. But they never asked why I never brought my own family around. Why I drove a modest car. Why I didn't flex, didn't boast, didn't chase credit. Because the truth? I didn't come into their world empty-handed. I came in playing the long game, and they gave me everything I needed to win it. I walked over to the small cabinet in the corner of the office and pulled out an old photo, one of Frederick and me at a Grafton warehouse site, both of us in construction vests and laughing over some ridiculous inventory glitch. He wasn't just my father-in-law. He was my mentor, the only person in that family who saw past the surface. He once told me, "This company doesn't need another prince. It needs a steward." That's what I'd been all along. While Trent played dress-up CEO and Evelyn plotted in corners, I made sure trucks left on time. That deal's closed. That software system stayed ahead of competitors. I did the work no one clapped for. And now? Now I was going to let them feel what happens when the man they dismissed turns out to be the pillar they were standing on. I turned off the lights in my office and stepped out into the hallway. Quiet. Empty. Clean. It reminded me of something I'd read once. True power is never loud. It is silent, still, and terrifying when revealed. They had seen the outsider, but soon they would meet the man behind the curtain, and they wouldn't know what hit them. When the news came in, I was already halfway through a morning call with one of our international partners. A short ping on my phone. Nothing flashy, just a private message from Frederick's driver. He's back. Early. Walking into headquarters now. I read it twice. Frederick wasn't supposed to return for another 2 weeks. His surgery had gone well, but the doctors had insisted on rest. 3 weeks minimum. No meetings. No emails. No stress. Clearly, that advice didn't stick. I leaned back in my chair, the corner of my mouth twitching into something between a smirk and a breath of relief. This was it. The moment that would flip the entire game board. I ended my call, locked my screen, and stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my private office, staring out over the city. My reflection looked back at me, calm, still, unreadable. I could already imagine how it was unfolding down there on the 25th floor. Frederick Grafton didn't walk into a room. He arrived. I could picture it perfectly. The double glass doors parting. The slight hush as employees recognized him. The quiet shuffle of people suddenly pretending to be busy, suddenly standing straighter. His cane tapping lightly against the floor, more for rhythm than support. The board meeting had already been scheduled that morning. Trent called it to announce new leadership strategies, his code phrase for grabbing more control. He thought he had the room. He thought his mother's influence would seal it. He had no idea the founder himself was about to walk into that room and break his little spell in half. I didn't go down. I didn't need to. That room was about to catch fire all on its own. Later, when the assistant who once avoided my eyes came running breathlessly into my office to tell me what happened, I just nodded and let her speak. But let me tell it to you the way I saw it in my mind. Because while I wasn't in the room, I know those people too well. Frederick stepped inside, early. No one saw it coming. One moment, Trent was mid-presentation, probably babbling about streamlining executive decisions, and the next, his father's voice cut through the noise like a sword through fog. "Where's Silas?" Just 3 words. That's all it took. Everyone froze. Trent blinked, confused. Dad, you weren't. How did it?" Frederick didn't sit, didn't smile. He just leaned slightly on his cane and repeated, this time with a colder edge, "Where is Silas?" You have to understand, Frederick wasn't a man of drama. But when he raised his voice, even a little, the room listened. Years of respect earned that right. Trent gave the kind of laugh you use when you're caught off guard and trying to play it cool. "Oh, him? Yeah. I let him go. He was only here because you felt sorry for him, remember?" Silence. I imagine it was the kind of silence that settles just before a storm shatters windows. That kind of silence. Frederick's entire expression changed. Not a flicker of surprise. He already knew, of course. But it was the way he let Trent say it out loud, like handing a man a shovel and watching him dig his own grave. "You fired him," Frederick said, voice as calm as ever. Trent, oblivious, still trying to flex. It was overdue. He was dead weight. No authority, no pedigree. You fool, Frederick snapped. The shift was instant. That was the moment the atmosphere in that boardroom fractured. You absolute fool, Frederick repeated, louder now. Didn't you know who he was? The heads of departments glanced around. Nervous glances. Fidgeting hands. Shifting in their chairs. These were people who had worked with me for years but never really looked at me. They heard the whispers from Evelyn, the passive insults from Trent, and they let them shape their judgment. But now? Now they were about to understand what they'd been sitting beside all along. Frederick stepped forward, slow but sure. Silas isn't just your brother-in-law, Trent. He isn't just an employee you can throw out because your mother whispered something in your ear. He paused. Then, in one breath, he dropped the bomb. He owns 40% of this company. Gasps. Real ones. That was the kind of sentence that doesn't land like words. It lands like thunder. Frederick pulled out a file from the leather folio under his arm. Pages rustled. Signatures. Witnesses. Seals. 3 years ago, I transferred those shares to him. Quietly. As a contingency for exactly this kind of nonsense. Not only does he hold equity, he holds voting power. Nearly equal to mine. Trent's face, they told me later, went ghost white. All the color drained. You could hear his breath catch. He stammered something about not knowing and miscommunication, but Frederick wasn't done. I left you in charge for 3 weeks, and in 2 days, you managed to insult the man who keeps your supply chain running, humiliate your brother-in-law, and destabilize trust across several departments. Congratulations. He turned to the board members. Let me be perfectly clear. Silas Grant is not only staying, he is one of us. And from this point forward, his silence should no longer be mistaken for submission. The meeting didn't last much longer after that. Some of them tried to backpedal, muttering support, saying they'd always respected me. I knew the types. Loyalty only when it's safe. I wasn't angry at them. I just didn't need them anymore. Later that day, Trent tried to storm into my office. He didn't make it past the hallway. Security didn't stop him. He stopped himself, stood outside my door, staring at the nameplate he hadn't seen before. S. Grant, Private Executive Office. He realized then that this wasn't new, that I'd been here all along, that this wasn't a comeback story. It was a checkmate. The phone started ringing before the meeting even ended. At first, I ignored it. Let it vibrate against my desk while I scrolled through my backlog of messages. But then it rang again, and again. 10 calls in 10 minutes. All from the same number. Trent. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, cradling a mug of dark roast between my hands, and let the silence of my office wrap around me like a second skin. I'd waited years for a moment like this, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. For once, the people who thought they ran the show were finally seeing the truth. And it terrified them. By the time his voicemail inbox hit capacity, I'd already heard enough. Silas, listen, man. Look, I didn't know. Nobody told me. Mom said. Pause. Fumbling breath. I swear if I'd known. I was just trying to protect the company. Please, call me back. We need to fix this. Fix this. As if this were a flat tire or a missed appointment. As if he hadn't humiliated me in front of half the company, slapped me like a dog in a boardroom, and tossed me out like trash. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, I opened my calendar and moved up a few internal review meetings. Frederick and I had agreed it was time to make some surgical corrections, and now the patient was wide open. I buzzed my assistant. Give me the files on all recent departmental hires, especially those made in the last 12 months under Trent's direction. I want performance records, incident reports, disciplinary logs. Everything. Her voice crackled through the speaker. Yes, Mr. Grant. Right away, Mr. Grant. It still made me pause. Not because it was new, but because it felt earned now. Not tolerated. Not begrudged. Earned. Trent called again an hour later. And then again. The second voicemail was even worse. His voice cracked midway. Silas, come on, man. You know how Mom is. She said you were just taking up space, that Dad only kept you around to keep Marielle happy. I didn't mean any of it. I was just trying to do what she wanted. Please. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word rolled around in my head like a loose marble in a glass. Except I hadn't misunderstood anything. They'd underestimated me, disrespected me, and tried to erase me. And now? Now they were scared. But the part that truly struck me wasn't Trent's desperation. It was the sudden, awkward silence from Marielle. Not one text. Not a single knock on my door. Nothing. The woman I had once dreamed of growing old with hadn't even asked if I was okay. Not after the firing. Not after the reveal. Not once. That kind of silence doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from choice. She had made hers, and I had made mine. Later that evening, just before sunset, I stepped out of my office and rode the elevator down to the executive garage. My car was parked in the same spot it had always been, sloppy 12, tucked beside the pillar. But this time, as I approached, something felt different. I turned the corner and found Trent leaning against my car. He looked like hell. Tie loosened, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, but trembling just enough to show the cracks. "Silas," he said, standing up straight. "We need to talk." I looked at him, really looked. Not the pompous little tyrant in designer suits, but the scared boy hiding under all that bluster. "We already talked," I said calmly. "Remember? You said I was here out of pity. You slapped me, had me escorted out like a thief." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "No," I replied. "You didn't bother to know." He looked away, then back. "I made a mistake." "That's not a mistake," I said. "A mistake is printing the wrong number on a sales sheet. What you did was intentional." I panicked, he admitted. "I thought Dad was done. Mom said I had to act fast, take charge, show strength. I didn't think you'd fight back." I almost laughed at that. "Fight back? Trent, I haven't even started." His face paled. "I'm not here to destroy you," I continued. "I don't need to. You've done that on your own. What I will do is rebuild what you try to tear down, and you'll watch it happen." He stood there for a second, shifting on his feet, searching my face for any sign of forgiveness. When he found none, he reached for the last thread he could grab. "What do I do now?" I paused, then stepped closer. "You start by remembering the exact moment you lost your crown and realizing it never belonged to you in the first place." I opened my car door, got in, and drove off without another word. As the city lights blurred past my windshield, I thought about how different things could have been. If Trent had ever bothered to listen. If Evelyn had ever looked beyond her pride. If Marielle had spoken even a single word in my defense. But none of them had. And now? Now they were all in panic mode. And me? I was just getting comfortable. Back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the quiet corner of the balcony. From up here, the world looked small. Predictable. Like a chessboard I already knew the moves to. My phone buzzed one last time that night. A text. From Trent. "Silas, please. I'll step down. I'll resign. Just don't shut me out completely. Please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Because when someone finally sees your worth after they've tried to erase you, that's not reconciliation. That's fear. And I wasn't going to give fear the satisfaction of a response. It was 3 years ago, but I remember that night like it happened yesterday. Frederick had called me unexpectedly, just after a late board meeting wrapped up. No explanation. Just a short message. "Come to the cellar." I almost laughed when I read it. The cellar? That wasn't a place for business. That was his private sanctuary, where he stored old vintages and family keepsakes, where only his most trusted company ever stepped. I had only been down there once before, briefly, to help him carry a delivery crate from a supplier in Bordeaux. But this time was different. I walked through the house, past the marbled kitchen and down the winding hallway until I reached the heavy oak door. It was already cracked open. I stepped inside and found him seated alone, a dim lamp casting long shadows across the stone floor. "Close the door," he said. His voice was low, calm, but there was something in it that told me this wasn't just about wine or idle reflection. I shut it gently behind me. On the table in front of him sat 2 glasses and a thick brown envelope. No branding, no seal, just a faint crease down the center, as if it had been opened and read many times. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." I obeyed, not out of obligation, but because when Frederick Grafton said sit, you did. He poured us both a drink. A deep red, one of his favorites. Then he slid the envelope toward me and said, "Read this. All of it." I pulled the contents free and saw legal papers. At first, they looked like stockholder documents, amendments to existing contracts. But as I read further, I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a blueprint. A hidden structure he had built within the very foundation of Grafton Enterprises. A system of protection, of power transfer, that activated only under certain conditions. Legacy clause, the heading read. According to it, Frederick had already transferred 40% of the company's voting shares into a silent trust, one registered under my name. Not public, not visible to general shareholders, not even to Evelyn, Marielle, or Trent. He had done this quietly, deliberately. I looked up at him, stunned. Why? I asked. Why me? Frederick leaned back, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he gave a quiet sigh. Because you remind me of me, he said. Back when I started this company in a warehouse with peeling paint and one fax machine that barely worked. He took a slow sip from his glass. I see the way you move through this family, this business. You don't shout. You don't fight for the spotlight. You just do the work. Smart, patient, steady. He paused. They think you're passive, Silas. But I know better. I've watched you fix things quietly that they didn't even know were broken. I didn't know what to say. I had never heard him speak this way before. Not with sentiment. Not with conviction so raw. You could have given this to Trent, I said, honestly. He's your son. Frederick laughed, dry, hollow. Trent is a show pony in a world that needs draft horses. He talks. He preens. He plays politics. But you? You keep things alive. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pen. I need you to sign that last page. The clause isn't valid until you do. I hesitated. Does Evelyn know? He shook his head. And she won't. She'd burn the whole company down to keep control in the family bloodline. She never understood that legacy isn't about blood. It's about stewardship. So I signed. And from that moment on, I became something else, not just an operations guy. Not just the quiet husband of the Grafton daughter. I became the silent spine of a $200 million company. And I carried that weight in silence for 3 long years. I kept my head down. Watched Trent rise, watched Evelyn manipulate meetings, watched Marielle's affection quietly wither into indifference. I said nothing. Not because I was weak, but because Frederick had asked me to wait. Let them show you who they really are, he had said. And they did. Every smirk, every exclusion, every boardroom slight. They thought I was irrelevant, a placeholder. But I was watching, documenting, letting the rope tighten just enough. Because that's the thing about power, when you don't flaunt it, no one suspects you have it. And when the moment finally comes, it doesn't land like a slap. It lands like a thunderclap. That morning when Trent fired me, when he stood there puffed up and smug, claiming I was only there out of pity, I had the clause in my briefcase the whole time. I could have pulled it out right there, dropped it like a grenade and walked out with the building in flames. But I didn't. Because this was never about revenge. It was about the truth. The truth Frederick saw in me. The truth they refused to see for themselves. And now, after all the whispers and betrayals, it was finally out. I could hear Frederick's voice in my head again, like a quiet echo in the back of my mind. They'll learn one day. But when they do, make sure they learn everything. And that was the part that stuck with me. Because the legacy clause wasn't just a backup plan. It was a test of patience, a test of character. I had waited 3 years, watching a family unravel itself from the inside. Not with hate, but with arrogance, with ego, with carelessness. And now, it was time to rebuild, not in their image, but in mine. Later that night, I pulled the original copy of the legacy clause from my private vault, held it under the light, ran my fingers across the notary seal. Everything Frederick had predicted had come true. The fall of Trent. The implosion of Evelyn's influence. Even the slow decay of Marielle's loyalty. I thought about him, sitting alone in that wine cellar, watching the empire he built tip dangerously toward vanity. And I realized something. He hadn't just given me the shares. He had given me the burden of fixing what he no longer could. And I intended to carry that burden with quiet precision. Because unlike them, I didn't need applause. I just needed results. The air outside the Grafton Enterprises building was crisp that morning. Sunlight spilled across the plaza like someone had tipped a jar of gold over the city. Employees trickled in like every other Monday, coffee in hand, half awake, unaware they were walking into a turning point. The kind that didn't just change headlines, but legacies. Inside the building, everything was already set. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp in the main atrium. Invitations had gone out the night before, carefully worded, deliberate. Frederick didn't want any leaks. No whispers ahead of time. No time for Trent or Evelyn to spin their version. This wasn't going to be a meeting. This was going to be a reckoning. I stood off to the side as the media poured in, reporters from every major business outlet, local journalists, even a few foreign correspondents. Grafton Enterprises had that kind of weight. It wasn't just a company, it was a name. a dynasty. And today, that dynasty was about to be rewritten. Frederick walked out right on time. No cane today. He'd refused it, despite his doctor's warnings. Said it made him look fragile. Said today, more than ever, he needed to stand on his own. He stepped up to the mic, calm and firm, his presence alone silencing the murmurs in the room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, scanning the room. "I'll keep this brief and clear. No greetings. No introductions. Just purpose. There's been a great deal of confusion about recent decisions made during my absence. While recovering from surgery, certain changes were made at the executive level, without my knowledge, and without proper authority." He paused there, letting the implication land. "I've reviewed these actions. I've met with legal counsel, and I've made my decision." He turned slightly, extending a hand toward the side entrance. "Silas Grant, please join me." The room stirred. Cameras snapped. Some gasped. Yes, gasped, like they were seeing a ghost. I walked forward, slow and steady, wearing the same suit they'd once called too plain for upper management. Only this time, every eye followed me. Not out of pity, but out of curiosity, maybe even respect. Frederick continued. "This man is not only a member of my family, but a critical pillar of this company's success. For years, he's worked behind the scenes, quietly maintaining our operations with precision, intelligence, and loyalty." He looked directly into one of the cameras now. Silas was removed from his position without justification. "And I'm here today to correct that mistake, publicly and permanently." He turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, Silas Grant is reinstated at Grafton Enterprises, not just as Director of Operations, but as Co-Chief Executive Officer. The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Microphones pushed forward. Flashbulbs went off like lightning. I stood still, my hands folded calmly in front of me, while the world finally saw the man they tried to erase. One voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Grafton, is this true? Does Mr. Grant actually hold significant ownership in the company?" Frederick didn't hesitate. "Yes. He owns 40% of Grafton Enterprises through a private trust one established 3 years ago. His stake is legally binding, irrevocable, and entirely earned." That last part? That was for Trent, and Evelyn, and maybe even Marielle, wherever she was. A second voice asked, "And what of Trent Grafton? Will he retain his position as CEO?" Frederick gave a tight, polite smile. "Trent will be taking an extended leave of absence, effective today." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the slap, the sneer, the way he laughed when he said I was only here out of pity. Pity, huh? Let's talk about that. Because what they never understood, what they still probably didn't, was that pity doesn't build companies. It doesn't hold late-night meetings with overseas vendors or reroute an entire logistics chain during a snowstorm or streamline a broken inventory system that's been hemorrhaging money for months. I did that, and I did it without asking for applause. Now, finally, I didn't have to. When the press conference ended, I stood beside Frederick as the reporters were escorted out. A few department heads lingered near the back, faces I recognized. Men and women who had worked with me, watched me, and silently judged me for years. One of them, Carlene from Finance, approached with cautious eyes. "Mr. Grant." Silas, I just wanted to say congratulations." I gave her a small nod. "Thank you, Carlene." She hesitated, then added, "We should have seen it earlier." I smiled, not unkindly. Most people don't look for what they don't expect to find. She blinked, then nodded, understanding. Back in my office, the congratulations continued. Some emails, some messages, some in-person gestures that felt awkward but sincere. People weren't sure how to treat me now. I wasn't the background man anymore. I wasn't just Marielle's husband or the ops guy who never spoke up. I was co-CEO, and they were learning how to adjust. But not everyone adjusted with grace. Evelyn didn't show her face that day. Neither did Trent. And Marielle? Not a call. Not a message. Not even a comment in the family group chat, which had now gone dead silent. I wasn't surprised. I think, deep down, she was more embarrassed by how it happened than what happened. Because I didn't just rise. I was lifted, by facts, by merit, by Frederick himself. And that sort of truth is hard to swallow when you've spent years convincing yourself you married down. That night, I sat in my living room, the co-CEO announcement still trending online. Business blogs dissected the decision. Some praised it as visionary. Others speculated about a power shift in the Grafton family. Some even called it a revenge story. They were wrong. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. I poured a drink, turned the phone face down, and allowed myself a moment I hadn't felt in years, peace. Because I didn't shout to be heard. I didn't fight to be seen. I just waited and showed up when it mattered most. Retribution didn't come with fists or fire. It came with a spreadsheet, a plan, and a closed-door meeting at 7 a.m. the Monday after my reinstatement, where the only thing louder than the ticking wall clock was the silence from those who used to dismiss me. I had called in every department head, finance, legal, HR, tech, logistics, you name it. Some came curious. Some came nervous. A few, like Dawn from marketing, walked in with smug skepticism, still thinking this was some temporary stunt orchestrated by Frederick. They didn't know I'd been watching for years. Every hire, every expense, every shortcut disguised as innovation. So when I stood at the head of the conference table and turned on the projector, I didn't start with small talk. I opened with a single slide. This ends now. There was no yelling, no theatrics. I didn't need them. I had facts, receipts, a compiled list of mismanaged accounts, underqualified hires, botched contracts, and cushy deals handed to friends of Trent or Evelyn. I had proof of nepotism so blatant it might as well have been printed on company letterhead. As I went line by line, I watched the realization dawn on their faces. This wasn't a figurehead promotion. This was a reckoning. And I wasn't there to get even. I was there to clean house. I'm not here to fire everyone who disagreed with me, I said, after laying it all bare. But I will remove anyone who mistook this company for their personal playground. A few heads lowered. I believe in accountability. I believe in clarity. And I believe in second chances for those who actually work. I paused. But make no mistake, those chances are limited. The message landed. By the end of that week, 3 of Trent's personal hires were gone, fired quietly, with severance packages I approved but didn't soften. Evelyn's favored HR director was reassigned to a branch in Nevada, far from the influence she used to wield, with a smirk and a whispered suggestion. And Trent? Oh, he stayed for now. Reassigned, not as an executive, but as a senior analyst in data strategy. A role he once joked was for clipboard guys with no ambition. Now he was one of them, answering to a department manager half his age, working on a team that didn't care about last names. Some called it cruel. I called it symmetry. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was reform. I didn't dismantle Grafton Enterprises. I recalibrated it. I began installing quarterly transparency reports, revamped the hiring process to use blind resumes, reopened vendor contracts to assess fairness and pricing. I promoted mid-level managers who had been overlooked for years, quiet, hard-working people like Tanya from procurement or Leo from IT, whose innovation had been repeatedly ignored because he wasn't Grafton material. They were stunned when I called them into my office, handed them new contracts, and said, "Your work hasn't gone unnoticed. It just hasn't been seen by the right eyes until now." I remember Tanya choking up, her voice trembling. I thought, people like me didn't get seen here. You do now, I told her. I made sure of it. The change wasn't instant. You can't turn a ship this big in one day. But within weeks, the mood shifted. People stopped walking on eggshells. They started sharing ideas again. Performance improved across the board. And slowly, the whispers stopped being about how I came into power and started being about what I was doing with it. One afternoon, after a particularly productive product launch meeting, I walked through the operations floor, the same floor I used to quietly oversee while people spoke over me. Now, voices lowered respectfully when I passed. Not out of fear, but out of earned presence. I paused by Trent's new desk. He didn't look up at first, just kept his eyes glued to his monitor, typing something stiffly. When he finally noticed me, he straightened. "Silas," he said with a slight nod. "How's the new team treating you?" I asked. "They're professional," he muttered. "Good," I said. "You might learn something." He winced, but didn't argue. That, at least, was new. I didn't linger. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing through a hallway where my name had once been a joke and was now etched in. For the name Grafton, which had been tarnished by ego and entitlement. One afternoon, Frederick called me into his home. He was sitting in his study, fireplace lit, glass of scotch in hand. "I've been watching," he said. I sat across from him, waiting. "You didn't burn it down. You rebuilt it." "I did what you asked," I replied. He nodded slowly. "No, you did more." He reached into his drawer and slid an envelope toward me. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a draft amendment. He was transferring another 10% of the company into my hands. No strings. Full control. You've proven who this company belongs to, he said. Now I'm making it official. I didn't speak right away. Because for a man like me, someone who had been mocked, slapped, discarded, this wasn't just a gesture. It was a confirmation. I stood, shook his hand, and thanked him. Not just for the trust, but for giving me the chance to earn it when no one else did. That night, I walked home instead of driving. The streets felt quieter, cleaner, like the chaos had settled. The wind was sharp, but it felt good, like something was being stripped away, leaving only what mattered. I passed by the old Grafton billboards downtown. For years, those signs showed Trent's grinning face or Evelyn's elegant branding slogans. Now, they displayed the company's new vision statement. Earned, not entitled. A message I'd written myself. And beneath it? Just the Grafton logo. No faces. No last names. Because real leadership doesn't advertise. It leads. It's strange how you can share a house with someone and still feel like a guest. After the press conference, after the restructuring, after the congratulatory handshakes and subtle nods from board members who used to look past me, Marielle said nothing. She was already home that evening when I arrived, standing by the kitchen island with a glass of wine and her phone, scrolling as if the day's events hadn't just turned her entire family's dynamic upside down. She didn't look up, didn't ask where I'd been, didn't say congratulations. Nothing. I walked in, loosened my tie, set my briefcase down, and waited for her to acknowledge me. She didn't. So I poured a glass of water and stood opposite her, letting the silence stretch. You heard, I finally said. She nodded without looking up. It was on every news channel. I'd have to be deaf not to. Another pause. And I asked. She glanced at me now, her eyes cool and unreadable. You really played us, didn't you? There it was. Not a question of concern. Not curiosity. Just accusation. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. I didn't play anyone. I protected what your family was willing to destroy. Her laugh was soft, almost bitter. Is that how you're spinning it now? The silent hero? The patient genius hiding in plain sight? I didn't hide, I said. You just never bothered to see. She set her glass down harder than necessary, the clink sharp against the marble. You could have told me. You could have told me, Silas. I tried, I replied. But every time I started, you either changed the subject or rolled your eyes. You wanted a version of me you could manage. Something safe, predictable, forgettable. Her eyes narrowed. You're twisting this. No, I said calmly. I'm finally untwisting it. She shook her head, walking toward the sink and turning her back to me. So what now? You're the king of the castle? Everyone bows to Silas? Even Trent, demoted and leashed? This isn't about crowns, I said. It's about responsibility. She stared out the window. It's about revenge. No. If it were, you'd be out of this house already. She turned then, finally facing me with something real in her eyes. Whether it was fear or guilt, I couldn't say. I didn't know what they were planning, she said quietly. I nodded. But you didn't stop them either. The words hung there, heavier than I expected. I didn't think it mattered, she admitted. You were always just there. Reliable. Quiet. I never thought you were. Capable. I offered. Worthy? Important. Dangerous, she said. That surprised me. You scare them now, she added. You scare me a little. That cut deeper than anything else she could have said. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I'd changed. Maybe not in my core, but in the way I moved. The way I was seen. And the man she married. The one who folded laundry on Sundays, fixed dripping faucets, smiled through dinner with her parents even while they belittled him. He wasn't standing in front of her anymore. He was gone. Replaced with someone who no longer bowed, no longer explained himself, no longer waited for validation that would never come. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, letting the tension settle. A few moments later, she followed and stood behind me, arms crossed. Why didn't you leave? She asked softly. After everything they did. After I didn't say anything. Why stay? I stared ahead at the muted TV screen, some documentary playing, irrelevant. Because I loved you, I said. Past tense. The silence after that was different. She sank into the chair opposite me, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you still? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the first time we met. How alive she was. How she made me feel like I belonged in rooms I never dared to enter before. I thought about the wedding, the vows, the way she squeezed my hand when we talked about starting a family. The woman who once looked at me like I was her whole world. But then I thought about the look on her face when Trent fired me. Blank. Cold. Distant. Like I wasn't worth defending. Like I was disposable. I met her eyes now, and I spoke with honesty, not cruelty. I don't know. She nodded slowly, like she had expected it, but hoped to hear something else. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said. But you did, I replied. Not with what you said, but with what you didn't. She wiped her eye quickly, the kind of motion someone makes when they don't want to cry in front of the person they failed. So what now, she asked. I keep doing what I was meant to do, I said. Lead. Rebuild. Be the man your father trusted me to be. And me? I exhaled through my nose, my voice steady but distant. That's up to you. We didn't talk the rest of the night. She went to bed before I did, and I stayed downstairs, reading a report on internal restructuring proposals. But not a single word on the page really sank in. All I kept thinking about was how love doesn't always leave with a door slam or a screaming match. Sometimes, it dies in the quiet. In the moment your wife watches you get dragged out of your job and says nothing. In the pause after success, where the person who's supposed to be proud of you just resents you for standing taller than they expected. Marielle and I lived under the same roof for the next few weeks, but something had broken beyond repair. We ate separately, slept on opposite sides of the house. We became polite strangers with too much history and too little heart left. She never asked about the company. I never brought it up. Then one morning, I walked into the kitchen and found a note on the counter. I've gone to stay with my sister for a while. I think we both need time. No signature. No kiss. No I love you. Just silence. Again. But this time, it didn't hurt. It felt honest. Because some betrayals don't come with screaming or slamming doors. They come with silence. And sometimes, silence is louder than anything else. Evelyn Grafton never begged. At least, not in any way most people would recognize. Her brand of power was polished and quiet, trimmed in pearls and practiced smiles. She didn't scream to get her way. She whispered. She aligned. She controlled from behind the curtain, making others believe her decisions were their own. But the thing about puppeteers is, once the strings snap, they're just people with no hands left to move the show. It started with a board meeting she called herself, an emergency session meant to realign vision. I received the calendar invite on a Tuesday evening. No agenda, no prep, no mention of Frederick. She still thought she had influence. She still didn't get it. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 10 minutes early and took my seat at the head of the table. Frederick wasn't there, by design. We'd already talked. He said it was time to let her try and fail in front of everyone. Let her be seen. The boardroom filled slowly. A few of the senior members whispered to one another. Evelyn entered last, wearing one of her signature white suits, pearls glinting, her heels clicking like an old judge entering court. She nodded to a few allies, former allies, rather, then turned to me with a smile so tight it might as well have been carved into her face. Shall we begin? She asked. I nodded. By all means. She stood at the front of the room, holding a tablet she didn't even glance at. There has been a great deal of disruption over the past few weeks, she began. While I respect the decisions made in my husband's absence, I believe they were emotionally driven, and perhaps misinformed. There it was, the start of her campaign. Smooth, elegant, insidious. I propose we revisit the current executive structure, she continued. Reevaluate the new appointments, and realign leadership toward experience and legacy rather than reaction. That word, legacy, she liked to use it as a weapon, as a crown, as if it belonged solely to bloodlines and birthday dinners. She paused, as if expecting a nod, a ripple of support. None came, so she pressed on. Furthermore, I'd like to nominate an interim executive advisory board, comprised of key family stakeholders, until things stabilize. I looked around the room, watching faces carefully. A few looked confused, others uncomfortable. Finally, I spoke. Are you suggesting a family-controlled committee override the board? I'm suggesting we return balance, she replied, still smiling. It's not personal, Silas. That was when I opened my folder and slid a document across the table toward the board secretary. This is a copy of the HR investigation your office buried 3 months ago, I said calmly. She blinked. Excuse me. It outlines how your interim hires under Trent falsified credentials, bypassed compliance screenings, and inflated operational numbers for a projected quarterly report you submitted to stakeholders. A hush fell over the room. Those errors were caught by Tanya Dorsey and Leo Barron, 2 employees you attempted to terminate under the justification of department redundancy. Luckily, your requests were flagged. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her tablet. I wasn't done. Second, I said, sliding a second folder to the legal counsel on my left. This includes email chains showing your direct interference in executive hiring decisions while Frederick was under medical care. That violates 3 clauses in the company charter and could be grounds for removal. Now there were murmurs. Real ones. One of the more senior board members leaned forward. Is this accurate? It's verified, I said. Frederick co-signed the documentation. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came out. I stood slowly, not with anger, with finality. You didn't protect the company, Evelyn. You protected your son. And in doing so, you jeopardized contracts, misused HR authority, and nearly tanked our expansion deal in Jakarta. She blinked rapidly now. The carefully composed woman was cracking, right there in front of people who had once followed her every word. I have spent the last 5 years fixing what you ignored, I said, louder now. And when I did it quietly, you called it luck. You called it pity. But let me make one thing clear. This company was never built on pity. It was built on precision. She turned to the others. This is an ambush. He's twisting facts. No, a voice interrupted. It was Carlene, from finance. He's telling the truth. Another voice chimed in. I reviewed the Jakarta fallout. He saved the deal. And another. My department was never consulted about those new hires. I didn't even know who they were reporting to. Evelyn turned pale. One by one, the board members aligned, not with me, but with truth. With merit. It wasn't personal. It was earned. When it was over, I didn't gloat. I didn't speak again. I let the board make their move. A vote was called. Unanimous. Evelyn Grafton was removed from all executive capacities, and her voting shares suspended pending legal arbitration. Frederick had signed off on it already. She stood there for a long moment, not moving, just breathing, like someone trying to wake up from a dream they couldn't believe had turned into a nightmare. Then, with dignity unraveling thread by thread, she gathered her things and walked out. No goodbyes. No farewell speech. Just silence. Later that day, Frederick and I met in his study. He didn't say much. Just sat with a scotch and nodded slowly. She always thought the company was her inheritance, he said. But it was never about blood. It was about who could carry it forward. She still thinks I stole it, I replied. She knows better now. That night, I sat alone on the back porch of the house, our house, though it felt emptier by the day. I looked up at the stars and let the cold night wind brush against my face. Trent had transferred to the Ohio branch without protest. No goodbye. No fight. Just a quiet exit. Evelyn hadn't spoken to Frederick since the vote. She'd hired a lawyer, of course, but we weren't worried. The evidence was airtight. Marielle was still at her sister's. She hadn't contacted me, and I didn't chase her. Because the truth is, when people show you what they value, believe them. They valued control, status, illusion. And I valued something else. A company with integrity. A legacy worth defending. A future not built on entitlement, but on effort. Evelyn once ruled this family like a matriarch out of marble and gold. But marble cracks. Gold fades. And power, real power, doesn't shout. It rebuilds quietly. One policy at a time. One truth at a time. One removal at a time. A year passed. 1 full year since Trent fired me with a smirk. Since Evelyn tried to reclaim the company through whispers and manipulation. Since Marielle walked out of our home with a bag, a note, and nothing else. I lived differently now. Mornings were slower. I woke before the sun, brewed my own coffee, and walked to work most days instead of driving. Not because I had to, but because I liked to watch the city wake up. The streets, the lights, the rhythm of life. It reminded me of how far I'd come, of how far they had tried to bury me, and how quietly I'd risen back to the top. But now that I was here, I didn't feel taller, just steadier. I had made Grafton Enterprises stronger than it had ever been. The chaos had burned away, leaving only what mattered. The executive structure was leaner, fairer. Promotions were based on metrics, not last names. Bonuses were tied to team success, not wine-glass alliances at board dinners. For the first time in its long and complicated history, the company felt clean. And yet, I didn't gloat. That's the thing about real leadership, it's quiet. It's not about parading titles or forcing people to acknowledge your power. It's about the slow, deliberate work of setting things right and letting the results speak for you. One afternoon, I stood by the tall glass window of my corner office, watching the rain blur the skyline. An intern knocked once, then stepped in with cautious energy. "Mr. Grant," she asked, "you've got the advisory session in 15 minutes." I nodded, but her eyes lingered. She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" I turned. "Of course." She stepped in a little closer. "How did you do it? I mean, how did you go from being fired to owning the place?" Her question wasn't sarcastic. It was curious, admiring, even. I smiled. "I let them believe I didn't belong," I said. "And by the time they realized they were wrong, it was too late to stop me." She blinked, then grinned. "That's kind of awesome." I nodded. "Just remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes it means you're working on something bigger than anyone else can see." She left after that, and I sat back in my chair, thinking. It still surprised me sometimes, how everything changed without a single dramatic outburst on my part. No public meltdown. No furious counterattack. Just time. Patience. Structure. Trent had been officially relocated to the Ohio branch. His email signature now read, Regional Strategic Analyst. A role he barely qualified for before, but one he was finally starting to take seriously. From what I heard, he showed up on time now. Read reports. Ask questions. Maybe losing everything humbled him. Maybe not. Either way, he was no longer my problem. Evelyn never returned to Grafton's headquarters. She lost her influence, her board seat, and most of her inner circle. The lawyers tried their best, but the case never made it to court. Too many documents. Too much evidence. In the end, she settled privately with Frederick and faded from the company's history like a shadow retreating from the light. As for Marielle, she came back once. 3 months after she left, I opened the door to find her standing there with a look I hadn't seen in years. Not pride, not arrogance, just sadness. "I didn't know who you really were," she whispered. I didn't respond. She looked down. "And now I don't know if I ever deserved you." There was nothing to say. We signed the divorce papers 2 weeks later. No drama, no tears, just signatures and silence. The same silence that had filled our house long before anything ever fell apart. Sometimes, love doesn't die loudly. It just disappears without saying goodbye. But this chapter isn't about loss. It's about presence. About what's left when the noise fades. I found purpose in the aftermath. I started a mentorship program within the company for employees who had been overlooked for too long. Men and women who reminded me of who I used to be. Quiet, diligent, never invited to speak at meetings, always expected to nod and move aside. I sat in on their first session, listening more than speaking. And when one of them, a young man named Kamal, asked me how to get people to notice his work, I told him the truth. "You don't chase their attention," I said. "You chase excellence. They'll find you when they need you, and by then, you'll be ready." He nodded like he understood. I hoped he did. One of the greatest misconceptions in business, and in life, is that loud means powerful. That to lead, you must shout. That to win, you must crush. But I built everything by doing the opposite. I listened. I waited. I learned. I didn't slam doors. I opened them from the inside. I didn't demand a crown. I earned it in silence. And that's why, when people now walk into our headquarters and see my name etched beside Frederick's on the glass plaque, they don't ask why. They just nod. Because by now, the story is legend. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I still think about that moment in the boardroom. The day Frederick returned and asked, "Where's Silas?" The pause. The panic. The silence that followed when he revealed who I really was. That moment didn't just expose the truth. It introduced me to myself. I wasn't just the man they underestimated. I was the man they never saw coming. And in the end, that's what makes it all so satisfying. Not the applause, not the title, not the corner office. But the fact that I didn't have to raise my voice to win. I just had to stand still and let the truth speak for him.